The bulldozer's claw was inches from crushing the roof when the ground beneath it let out a deep, echoing boom. For a brief, chaotic second, I swear Karen thought she'd triggered an earthquake. I was still in my pajama pants, barefoot on the driveway, yelling at the top of my lungs while sirens blared from hidden speakers embedded in the garage wall. The look on her face when a red laser dot appeared on the front of her yoga top? Priceless. She had no clue that what she thought was an unpermitted storage shed was actually a federal FEMA Command Center with biometric locks, underground surveillance arrays, and satellite uplinks that just pinged Homeland Security. It had all started 2 weeks earlier with a pink slip taped to my mailbox. Not a termination letter, but worse, an HOA notice of noncompliance signed by none other than Karen DeVille, the HOA's newest aesthetic regulation officer. Apparently, my garage violated the harmony of rooflines on the block. Never mind that the garage was the exact same color, pitch, and style as my house. Karen just didn't like it. She said it was bulky, intimidating, and not conducive to visual tranquility. I ignored it at first. I'd dealt with Karen before. She once tried to fine a neighbor for having mismatched patio chairs. But she escalated fast. A week later, a second notice arrived. This time, it was stapled to my actual front door and included a $500 fine. The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so aggressive. She wrote that failure to comply would result in forcible correction of the structure at the homeowner's expense. I called the HOA office, but they brushed it off and told me Karen had board support. Support from who? No one on the board even seemed to know what she was doing half the time. Still, I kept calm. I had my permits. I had federal clearance. I knew the garage's real purpose, and so did a very short list of people in Washington, D.C. The garage wasn't built for storing tools and old bikes. It was part of a FEMA emergency comms and coordination network. After I retired from my old job in intelligence, I contracted with the feds to oversee one of their silent response hubs, tucked away under what looked like an ordinary suburban home. The garage's upper shell was a decoy. Beneath it sat a concrete-reinforced, EMP-shielded bunker with direct lines to FEMA, DHS, and the Pentagon. There were drills, protocols, encrypted signals. This wasn't just a man cave. It was a literal nerve center for disaster recovery. And Karen wanted to bulldoze it because she thought it was an eyesore. That morning, I was jolted awake by a strange rumble. I looked out the window to see a rented yellow bulldozer pulling onto my driveway, trailed by a landscaping crew and Karen in her signature peach tracksuit. She was holding a clipboard and barking orders into a walkie-talkie like she was leading a military op. I grabbed my phone, hit the emergency override app, and sprinted outside. "Stop!" I screamed, waving my arms. "You can't do this." Karen turned to me and actually rolled her eyes. "Mr. Holloway, we sent you 2 notices. You're in violation. This is federal property." I shouted. "Don't be ridiculous. It's a garage. And it's hideous." I tried to get between the bulldozer and the garage, but the driver hesitated anyway. That's when the sensors embedded in the ground triggered. A loud, mechanical click echoed underfoot, followed by a low-frequency warning tone. Then came the sirens, sharp, blaring pulses from hidden points all over the yard. Red lights flashed from under the garage eaves. A camera on the roof swiveled toward the bulldozer. Karen looked stunned. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, a robotic voice issued from a hidden speaker. "Unauthorized structural interference detected. Lockdown protocol engaged. Response team en route. Vacate area immediately." Karen blinked like she didn't understand English. "Is this a joke? You're playing sounds off a speaker." "No, Karen," I said, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back. "You just triggered a national emergency protocol." But it was already too late. The system had flagged the attempted breach. In less than 5 minutes, a drone zipped overhead, scanning license plates and faces. Karen shrieked and ducked like it was a UFO. I didn't even try to calm her. She'd brought this on herself. Then came the SUVs. 3 of them, black, unmarked, tires squealing as they stopped just short of Karen's rental Bulldozer. Men in tactical suits stepped out, no sirens, no flashing lights. Just purpose and precision. The tallest one, clearly in charge, marched up the driveway and flashed a badge. "Ma'am," he said coolly, "you're interfering with a FEMA command site. We need you to step away from the machinery." Karen puffed up like a poodle ready to bite. "This is private property. I'm with the HOA. The agent didn't even blink. "That's not how this works. I demand you show me a warrant," she yelled. The agent leaned in, calm as ever. "We don't need one." She looked at me with a face full of betrayal. "You're behind this. What is this place really?" "I told you," I said. "It's not a garage." That's when another siren echoed from somewhere down the block. The federal backup team had locked down the street perimeter. Karen's Bulldozer operator threw his hands up and ran. A second agent took Karen by the wrist, gently but firmly, and started walking her back to the curb. "I'm calling the mayor," she shrieked. "I suggest you call a lawyer instead," the agent replied. In the midst of the chaos, I finally exhaled. The garage was safe. But the neighborhood? It had just become ground zero for the most bizarre HOA overreach scandal the federal government had ever seen. And Karen had always been obnoxious, but I'd never imagined she'd escalate from passive-aggressive letters to full-on demolition. Now, standing with her arms crossed in the back of a black SUV surrounded by agents in tactical gear, she looked more like a failed villain than the self-righteous HOA queen she fancied herself to be. The neighborhood had gone eerily quiet after the sirens faded. Curious heads peeked out from behind blinds, one neighbor even filming from their porch, whispering into the camera like they were broadcasting live coverage of a hostage situation. I didn't blame them. The whole street was now cordoned off. Yellow tape had gone up, Homeland Security had deployed a mobile ops van, and Karen's Bulldozer sat idling awkwardly on my driveway, now completely abandoned by its operator. One of the FEMA agents, Ramirez, handed me a tablet with a list of incident code. "We're flagging this as an attempted breach on federal infrastructure," he said, eyes scanning the perimeter. Did she know the nature of this structure? "Not even close," I said. "She thought it was ugly." He blinked once, then snorted. "Well, it's about to get uglier for her." Another agent was interviewing Karen on the curb. Despite being surrounded by people who could quote the Patriot Act from memory, she still insisted this was a misunderstanding. Her voice rang out, nasal and entitled, as she pointed toward my house. "That garage has been non-compliant since construction began. There are bylaws about symmetry. Our HOA policy strictly states that roof lines must align within 2 degrees of neighboring elevation averages." The agent just stared at her, confused. "Ma'am, you just drove heavy machinery onto a federal staging site. This isn't about roof lines anymore." She scoffed and turned to me. "Tell them you'll drop the complaint. We'll let you keep the garage if you repaint it beige." Ramirez chuckled beside me. "She really doesn't get it." I shook my head slowly. "No, she doesn't. And she's about to find out." Within the hour, the perimeter was cleared and Karen was released, pending formal charges. They couldn't arrest her right then because technically, she hadn't crossed certain thresholds under federal law. But they had her name, her footage, her emails, and her Bulldozer. More importantly, they had interest. Interference with FEMA installations, even unintentional, is no joke. And while Karen thought she was walking away victorious, she was actually walking straight into the jaws of something she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Back inside, I activated lockdown override and descended into the bunker below the garage. A curved staircase led into a control center humming with low blue light. It wasn't big, about the size of a modest apartment, but every surface was lined with screens, secure servers, and encrypted communication panels. I placed a call to my handler at FEMA HQ. "This one's going in the file," she said after I explained the situation. We'll dispatch a public affairs liaison. In the meantime, document everything. Don't make contact. Already done, I replied, sending her the drone footage and security logs. She brought a bulldozer, for crying out loud. And she thought it was a design issue? She cited roofline harmony. There was a pause, then a sigh. I'm putting this under Level 2 domestic civilian escalation. If she makes one more move, we'll authorize a full legal engagement. I knew what that meant. Civilian escalation Level 2 wasn't martial law, but it came with teeth, fines, injunctions, federal cease and desist orders, and worst of all for someone like Karen, a full audit of any organization she was affiliated with. That meant the HOA. The next morning, I woke up to a different kind of madness. A folded piece of paper was taped to my mailbox again. This time, it was a letter on official HOA letterhead. It read, "Dear Mr. Holloway, due to recent disturbances and aggressive reactions to community beautification efforts, the board has decided to escalate disciplinary actions. You are hereby summoned to a formal hearing next Tuesday. Failure to attend will result in further corrective measures. Signed, Karen DeVille, Enforcement Chair." I actually laughed out loud. She hadn't just doubled down, she'd buried the gas pedal into the floor. Despite everything that had happened, despite the fact she'd just been interrogated by FEMA agents, she was still operating like this was her kingdom and I was just an unruly serf. I called Ramirez. "You're not going to believe this," I said. "I might," he said. "She file something stupid? She's calling a hearing." He didn't laugh. "Good. Let her. We're pulling her digital footprint now. If there's any trace of premeditation, she's toast." That week passed in a strange blend of quiet tension and anticipation. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. One neighbor claimed Karen had filed permits to expand her backyard and install a koi pond with HOA funds. Another said she'd had a meltdown at the community pool after someone used a towel that didn't match the HOA-approved color scheme. None of it surprised me. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was addicted to control. The day of the hearing arrived. It was held in the HOA clubhouse, a building that looked like it was designed for bake sales but had somehow become the nerve center of local tyranny. When I walked in, Karen was already seated at the front table, flanked by two other board members who looked like they hadn't slept in days. There was a projector set up, a coffee urn half empty, and rows of plastic chairs filled with residents who'd come purely for the spectacle. Karen stood and cleared her throat. "Mr. Holloway, we're here today to address your continuous violations and aggressive behavior toward community standards." I didn't say a word. Instead, I opened my briefcase, pulled out a folder marked Evidence, and handed it to the other board members. Inside were printouts of federal documents, security footage stills, and copies of my FEMA credentials. I also included a transcript of the automated warning Karen triggered when she sent that bulldozer into my yard. One of the board members, the treasurer, I think, scanned the pages, went pale, and whispered something into Karen's ear. She waved him off and kept reading aloud from her script. "The garage has not been aesthetically approved. It's in direct violation of Section 14, Subsection B. Subsection B doesn't apply to federally sanctioned installations," I interrupted calmly. Karen looked like she was about to explode. "That's not possible. This is a private neighborhood. We have rights." "No, you don't," I said. "Not over this structure. Not over this property. And not when your actions constitute a breach of national security." There was a long, dead silence. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. Slow at first. Then more joined. Soon half the audience was applauding. Karen's face flushed bright red. One of the board members stood up and announced, "We need a recess." But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. Karen's power was slipping, and she could feel it. She stormed out of the room without another word, leaving behind a trail of gasps, gossip, and a whole lot of questions she wasn't ready to answer. I didn't need to follow her. I knew the storm was coming, and for once I wasn't the one about to be caught in it. Karen's departure from the HOA meeting didn't go unnoticed. If anything, it became the neighborhood's version of a Netflix cliffhanger. Within hours, clips of her storming out circulated in the community group chat, and someone even edited in dramatic music and the words, "TOB continued." It wasn't just that she had overstepped, it was that she had finally been confronted with a power greater than hers, and she had no idea how to handle it. The rest of the board scrambled to recover, but it was like watching a three-legged dog try to win a relay race. Every attempt at control now just made things worse. The next day, I got a knock at my door from Dale, the treasurer who'd whispered in Karen's ear at the hearing. He looked pale and uncomfortable, holding a manila folder and shifting his weight like a teenager asking someone's dad for prom permission. He didn't even wait to be invited in before he blurted out, "We didn't know it was federal. I swear. She told us it was just some unauthorized man cave." I took the folder from his hands and opened it. Inside were copies of email chains, board meeting notes, and memos, all showing that Karen had been pushing for my garage's demolition for months. Most of the board had expressed concern or confusion, but she'd railroaded them with threats of removal from the board or accusations of being anti-community. She even wrote in one email, "If we wait for him to move it, we'll never get rid of it. We have to be proactive. Call in the crew." There it was in black and white, premeditation. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you, Dale. You might have just saved yourself from a federal audit." He gulped and nodded back. "She's been intense. None of us really knew how far she'd go. We just wanted to keep the neighborhood looking nice." "This wasn't about looking nice," I said. "This was about her needing to win. And she just picked the worst hill to die on." Later that afternoon, FEMA agents returned. Not with weapons this time, but with legal folders, documentation teams, and a public liaison. They weren't here to arrest Karen yet, but they were preparing for litigation. I walked them through everything I had: footage, audio, HOA correspondence, eyewitness statements. They were especially interested in the emails Dale had dropped off. As the liaison flipped through them, she paused on one and chuckled darkly. She called the garage a visual terrorist threat to community harmony. That's not just absurd, it's ironically poetic. We began building a full case under the Federal Emergency Management Non-Interference Act, which protected infrastructure like mine. More than that, the investigation into Karen expanded beyond my property. FEMA discovered she'd used HOA funds to pay for private contractors, without authorization from the full board. That Bulldozer? Paid with a community beautification grant that was never approved. One of the invoices showed the description landscape correction for non-conforming structure. They were building a financial misconduct case now, too. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't done digging her own grave. She showed up on a local news segment, standing in front of the HOA clubhouse and claiming she was the victim of government harassment. "They're trying to silence community leadership," she said into the microphone, smiling like she was running for office. "This isn't about garages. This is about power. And I won't back down just because some former government goon says he's above the law." The anchor tried to press her. "But were you aware that the structure is classified federal property?" Karen smirked. "I was aware it was an eyesore." That quote ran in every media cycle for 2 days straight. My phone lit up with people I hadn't talked to in years. A retired colleague from FEMA texted, "You sure know how to pick neighborhoods." Even my mother called just to say, "I always knew you'd end up on the news. I just didn't think it'd be because of a garage war." The local government stepped in next. The city council sent a cease and desist to the HOA, blocking them from enforcing any further actions without municipal review. That was the final straw for the other board members. At the next emergency meeting, they held a vote of no confidence and formally removed Karen from her position. The video of her being escorted out of the clubhouse by a private security officer, still wearing her signature peach tracksuit, quickly surpassed the previous clip in popularity. But even after being dethroned, Karen wouldn't go quietly. She began printing flyers, claiming my garage was part of a secret government surveillance plot on local homeowners. She accused me of watching her bathroom, and even tried to get a restraining order, which was immediately dismissed in court when the judge found out she had initiated demolition against federal infrastructure. Her behavior wasn't just spiraling, it was imploding. The next few days brought more twists. I received a quiet tip from a neighbor who used to serve on the HOA before Karen joined. He handed me a USB drive and said, "She's been doing this a long time." The files contained old meeting recordings, audio clips of Karen threatening to sue elderly residents over unapproved wind chimes, and even a phone recording where she berated a teenager for playing basketball too loudly near her hedges. This wasn't just one mistake. This was a pattern of petty tyranny. I compiled everything into a dossier and handed it over to FEMA and the city attorney's office. Together, they prepared a dual civil and federal complaint. Karen was now facing fines for misuse of funds, unauthorized equipment deployment, harassment, and federal interference. She'd gone from HOA monarch to a one-woman cautionary tale. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had shifted dramatically. People who used to avoid eye contact at the mailbox were suddenly waving, thanking me for standing up to her. One neighbor baked me a pie. Another offered to mow my lawn. The air felt lighter, the tension dissolved. A group of us even formed a temporary neighborhood committee, with no bylaws, no fines, and no Karen. It was strange how quickly people snapped back into normal once the shadow was gone. But the best part came the following Monday. As I returned from a FEMA briefing, I noticed something on Karen's freshly manicured front yard. Someone had stuck a cardboard cutout of a bulldozer in her garden bed, complete with a speech bubble that read, "I bulldozed the wrong guy." I didn't know who did it, and I didn't ask. Sometimes, justice is anonymous and petty and perfect. I stood at my window that evening, sipping coffee, watching Karen's house. The lights were on, but the once bustling activity had stopped. No more HOA meetings. No more patrols. Just silence. And as I looked over at my garage, unmoved, unharmed, and now even more secure, I smiled. Because for once, someone else had underestimated the wrong person. And this time, the fallout wasn't classified. It was personal. And very. Karen may have lost her title, but she hadn't lost her flair for denial. Even after being removed from the HOA board, slapped with cease and desist orders, and exposed on local news like a reality show villain, she strutted around the neighborhood like she still owned it. She stopped waving her little HOA badge and started carrying a clipboard with the words, "Citizen Watch," written in red marker. She wasn't enforcing policy anymore, at least, not legally. But she was documenting everything like she was preparing for trial. Lawn too long? She wrote it down. Dog barking? She wrote it down. My sprinkler head misaligned for 5 minutes? Written, highlighted, and underlined. Everyone thought she'd slink away in shame. But Karen wasn't the slinking type. She was the die on the most absurd hill possible type. And this time, that hill was the courtroom. It started when I received a letter, hand-delivered and shoved into my front door with unnecessary force. The envelope was covered in glitter glue and stickers shaped like gavels. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the county courthouse. Karen was suing me. Her charges? Harassment, psychological warfare, and reputational sabotage through unauthorized federal theatrics. I read the entire thing twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She had written it herself, and it was filled with long-winded legal jargon she clearly pulled from crime dramas. There were sentences like, "He conducted covert operations using surveillance-grade misdirection," and "The psychological toll of garage deception has rendered me socially incapacitated." The best part? She was representing herself. I forwarded the documents straight to FEMA's legal division. They had been waiting for her to take a legal swing. This gave them the perfect opportunity to counter with their own federal complaint. Within 48 hours, Karen received not just a response, but a motion to dismiss her case and a lawsuit of their own. Unlawful tampering with federally secured infrastructure and unauthorized use of public HOA funds. She went after me, and instead triggered a multi-agency legal hammer. I almost felt bad. Almost. The first court date was like a circus with security guards. It was held in the county courthouse, and the gallery filled up with residents, ex-board members, local reporters, and even a podcaster who claimed to run a show called HOA Horrors, Tales from the Cul-de-sac. Karen arrived in a beige pantsuit with shoulder pads and a binder thicker than a phone book. She walked with purpose, chin up, as if this was her moment of redemption. She addressed the judge like she was auditioning for a legal drama pilot. "Your Honor," she began, "I come to you today not just as a woman wronged, but as a defender of visual peace." The judge blinked twice. "Is that a legal argument?" She pressed on. "My rights were bulldozed just as thoroughly as I attempted to bulldoze that alleged garage." He raised a hand. "You're openly admitting to initiating a demolition against someone else's property?" She paused, realizing the hole she was digging was getting deeper. "What I mean is, the structure was a threat to aesthetic unity. I had to act." FEMA's attorney stood up calmly. "Your Honor, this is a classic case of willful ignorance. The defendant, who is not a federal employee, took unilateral action against a secured command site. She was warned. She escalated. And she's now facing the full consequences of that decision." Karen turned and pointed straight at me. "He never disclosed what it was." The judge leaned forward. "Because it was classified." Karen's face twitched, like someone had just turned off her brain mid-sentence. "Classified? But I'm part of the community." The courtroom chuckled, and the judge didn't bother silencing them. The rest of the hearing went downhill for her. FEMA presented documents confirming the site's legitimacy, detailed logs of the intrusion, and footage of her on the property screaming about roofline violations. When they brought out the drone footage from her unauthorized surveillance attempt the week prior, she had actually tried sneaking through the back alley with binoculars. The judge visibly sighed. The turning point came when FEMA submitted a motion to seal part of the hearing to discuss the command center's functions. Karen protested, saying, "If I'm being accused of interfering with something, I should know what it is." The judge granted a private review. 15 minutes later, he returned to the courtroom pale and silent, then simply said, "This court acknowledges the structure in question as a designated federal facility. The plaintiff's complaint is hereby dismissed." Karen didn't move. She stood frozen, as if her body had lost connection with her soul. Her binder slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor, spilling papers like confetti. Everyone sat in awkward silence. Then came the countersuit proceedings. FEMA's legal team didn't hold back. They demanded reimbursement for emergency response resources, legal time, and structural damage caused by her bulldozer stunt. The total? $75,000. Karen tried to respond, but all she managed to say was, "But it was just a garage." The judge signed the judgment without blinking. "It's never just a garage when you mess with the government." The verdict spread like wildfire. Local news ran headlines like, "HOA Karen vs. FEMA ends in $75,000 loss," and "Garage of Doom costs HOA Queen her crown." Someone updated the community's online map with a red dot over my house and labeled it Area 52. Kids started joking about how my garage could launch rockets. Even the mailman asked if I had a secret elevator to the Pentagon. Back at home, I received an official letter from FEMA with an apology for the incident and a commendation for my discretion and composure. They even sent a bronze plaque I mounted on the garage wall. It read, "Federally secured facility. Violators will be prosecuted or ridiculed, whichever is more efficient." I couldn't stop laughing. Karen, however, didn't laugh. She disappeared from public view for a while. Her house went quiet. Her once immaculate yard started growing weeds. The granite mailbox she once bragged about now sat crooked, leaning like it had given up. Nobody missed her clipboard patrols or weekly citations. It was like the HOA detoxed itself the moment she lost power. A few weeks later, I passed her at the grocery store. She avoided eye contact and pretended to read the label on a can of beans for an uncomfortably long time. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Her story had already become legend. And yet, part of me suspected she wasn't done. Not completely. Karen was the type of person who couldn't survive without authority, even if it was made-up authority over imaginary rules. But now she knew better than to mess with me. The next time she felt the urge to challenge someone, she'd think twice. Because once you've faced off against federal agencies, national ridicule, and your own binder exploding in court, you either grow as a person or you finally learn to mind your own business. The community healed. Neighbors once divided by color-coded trash bins and garden gnomes now joked about installing hidden cameras just in case Karen made a comeback. We started having block parties again, potlucks, casual porch chat. No clipboards. No fines. No threats. It felt like freedom. All thanks to a garage that wasn't just a garage, and one very persistent Karen who made the worst mistake of her life, thinking she could bulldoze it without. In the weeks that followed Karen's courtroom collapse, life in the neighborhood took on a kind of peaceful rhythm no one had experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, there were no HOA notices taped to doors, no awkward conversations about mulch color compliance, and no random tape measures appearing in people's flower bed. The atmosphere was lighter. Kids played freely on the sidewalks again, music drifted from backyard barbecues, and people started waving at each other without suspicion. It was as if the fog of tyranny had lifted, and all it took was one woman trying to bulldoze her way into federal prison. Despite the tranquility, I stayed alert. Not because I expected Karen to retaliate, she'd been thoroughly dismantled, but because I knew how bureaucracy worked. Paper trails needed to be finalized, security reviews needed to be closed, and the FEMA facility beneath my garage had to be formally recertified after the breach attempt. Agents came and went over the course of several days, running diagnostics, testing sensors, replacing surveillance drives, and patching up minor damage the bulldozer had caused when it scraped the concrete lip of the bunker entrance. When they were done, they gave me a quiet nod and left a final clearance document. I framed it and hung it in the command center right next to the plaque. It felt like a badge of honor, not just for protecting a government site, but for surviving the most ridiculous civilian interference operation anyone had seen in years. Word of the incident had traveled far beyond our town. A few online forums picked it up, then it hit Reddit, then it snowballed. People shared the story under r/EntitledPeople and r/HOA Hell, and before I knew it, someone had animated a short version and posted it to YouTube. 1 million views later, the story was practically a meme. Strangers sent messages calling me Garage Man and Federal Chad. I couldn't go to the local diner without someone quoting Karen's court line, "I come to you today not just as a woman wronged." A college radio show even did a dramatic reenactment with sound effects and a laugh track. Then came the most unexpected twist of all. I received an invitation, formal and sealed, from FEMA headquarters. Inside was a letter of recognition thanking me for my cooperation, professionalism, and unshakable calm during the incident. They wanted me to consult on a new program that trained operatives on how to deal with civilian interference during sensitive operations. The letter ended with a sentence I read 3 times to make sure it was real. "We believe your experience uniquely qualifies you to assist in crafting outreach protocols between secure federal installations and surrounding communities." In other words, Karen's bulldozer stunt had earned me a promotion. I accepted the offer, of course. It wasn't about money, it was about the poetic justice of it all. She tried to demolish me out of pettiness and pride, and it backfired so hard that the federal government turned me into a subject matter expert. I began remote briefings almost immediately, reviewing footage of civilian encounters with restricted sites, offering suggestions on de-escalation strategies, and occasionally using clips from my own ordeal as what not to do examples. I never named Karen directly, but anyone who saw the footage knew. The neighborhood, meanwhile, threw a celebration, not just for me, but for themselves. They called it Freedom Fest, and hosted it right in the cul-de-sac. There were food trucks, a bounce house, a dunk tank where someone wore a blonde wig and peach tracksuit as they got dropped into cold water again and again. No one said Karen's name, but everyone knew. One neighbor even built a mini replica of my garage out of cardboard, complete with tiny security cameras and a fake drone that hovered on a fishing line. I couldn't stop laughing. But of course, no story ends perfectly clean. About a month after the party, the underground sensors pinged at 2:12 a.m. Nothing major, just a small movement alert near the rear fence. I checked the surveillance feed from the bunker and nearly choked on my coffee. There she was, Karen, wearing a black hoodie and crouching near the bushes, holding what appeared to be a plastic toy periscope. She was using it to try and look into the yard from behind a decorative planter. I didn't even know those things were real outside cartoons. I didn't call the agents. I didn't activate the alert system. I just turned on the motion-activated sprinkler system that had recently been upgraded by FEMA tech. A silent whoosh sprayed across the yard, catching her full in the face. She yelped, dropped the periscope, and ran, tripping over her own foot and falling flat on her side before scrambling back into the alley. The camera caught the whole thing. I saved the footage to a new folder I named Karen 2.0, The Cold War. The next morning, I found the toy periscope lying in the dirt. I picked it up, wiped it off, and placed it on a shelf in the bunker as a reminder. Some people just don't learn. But it didn't matter. The power was gone. Her influence was shattered. All that remained was one drenched, sneaky woman trying to recapture the feeling of being important by spying on the very place that had crushed her ego. She didn't even know that all her movements were being recorded with HD clarity, archived, and stored under secure federal logs. A few days later, the community installed a wooden sign near the clubhouse lawn that read, "Caution, premises monitored for federal comedy purposes." It was half a joke, half a warning, and entirely accurate. Nobody bothered Karen anymore. Nobody answered her flyers. Nobody attended her impromptu garage sale where she tried to sell old HOA forms as collector's documents. She faded into the background like a former actor who had finally realized the show was over. I resumed my daily routine, coffee, morning system checks, maybe a walk around the block. And every so often, a new neighbor would ask about the garage, lowering their voice like they were asking about buried treasure. I always smiled and told them the truth. Yes, it's a command center, yes, it's real, and yes, you can still park a car in there if you know which panel to touch. Their reactions were priceless. And so, the garage remained, undisturbed, fully functional, and still operating quietly beneath an ordinary house in an ordinary neighborhood. A hidden fortress that withstood the most unlikely threat imaginable, an HOA Karen with a bulldozer and a dream. In the end, she gave me more than headaches and court transcripts. She gave me clarity, community, and the best job I never saw coming. And just between us, I kept the toy periscope polished and on display. Not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder that some battles are won not with force, but with patience, timing, and a perfectly placed sprinkler system.